Hey guys, Cliff the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to the channel. I've done quite a few reviews of Strainwave gear, our harmonic drive mounts recently. I've done, of course, the ZW EM5 mount review. I've done a review for the Warp Astron WD20, which has been basically my main workhorse for a while now and that I really like, despite its software quirks that I mentioned in the review. By the way, it's now available on Emcan Astro, so you can buy it finally locally from the US. I have the links down in the description. And I've also reviewed this one from Proxy Sky there, Emcan Astro, the EM17 Lite. So when I was contacted by a company I had never heard of, and that company is Emcan Astro. And it told me like, hey, we want you to review this mount. We'll send it to you as a loan. And once you've done reviewing it, you just send it back to us. I was a bit skeptical. I was tired of reviewing mounts, to be honest. But they basically told me like, this is a premium mount. It's basically a premium version of the ZW EM5 with super innovative polar alignment mechanism that does not require locking the knobs at the end, so you never bump your polar alignments. So that intrigued me. And they also said, like, we also have a great tripod that is an option, but it's much better than the TC40 from ZW, which, to be honest, it's not very hard to be better than that. But then they sent me also a PDF with like the tests they had done or the simulations they hadn't done about the forces on the tripod legs with color coding and crazy stuff like that. And like I started to be more and more interested because it seemed they had indeed some attention to detail. They also said that mount is 4 kilograms for the main body. So that's 1 kilogram less than the ZW EM5, even though it shares the same specifications. And they also told me that the founder of that company apparently worked or came from the automotive industry and wanted to basically apply their savoir-faire from the automotive industry to the astrophotography niche. Okay, so that was enough. My interest was piqued and I accepted to receive a loan unit that I will have to send back at the end of this review period. And this is how the mount that I received looks like. And I also received the tripod that they alluded to. And this is actually the first thing that I opened. Each came in their respective cases for the tripod and for the mount. Those are soft cases, which are quite nice. I know that people like hard cases better these days, but I'm personally I'm a big fan of those soft cases. It reminds me of like photography equipment bags, and I kind of like it. And so because I opened the tripod first, I want to tell you that when I started using the tripod, they already had me, because the tripod is really well thought out. Let me show you. So obviously, here we have the tripod. The legs are fairly thick while not being extremely thick either. It has a nice tripod spreader that you can set up very easily, and I like that it has that. And instead of like those legs that you can collapse into the tripod to make them shorter, which are kind of points where vibrations and stability can cause issues, the leg extenders here, they're screwed on exactly like with my Japanese tripod that I bought recently. So you can see I removed the leg extension, and the leg without the extension could also be used on its own if you're looking for a low kind of tripod, which is good. The tripod itself is also very light. So that's a big part of why I like this tripod. It does not extend normally, it screws in. And I think that's a big deal. Together with a nice spreader at the bottom, one other feature that I really liked and that I'm not using on this rooftop, but that could be very useful for traveling with your equipment, is it has those parts there can be rotated in the same direction, by the way, that you would use to screw in the legs, but they can be rotated, and that will actually adjust the level of the tripod with those milli adjustments. And if you look at the bottom here, you even have a scale here so that you can remember where you were and adjust that as you see fit. And since I know that a lot of people religiously level their tripods, this makes the job so much easier. It should also be noted that to place the mount in place, we have a standard kind of a screw-in type of knob at the bottom of the tripod, which is always nice. And where the mount head will fit is not an open circle like you see on the Gitso kind of format and what some other tripods use, but an actual groove that they say is better for stability. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But yeah, it is not a hole, it is a groove there in which the mount head will fit. We also have 3 locking screws on the sides to keep things in place, and of course like things like the bubble level, classic stuff. And so adding the mount on top is very easy. I can just plop it into the groove there, screw in the knob at the bottom, and tighten the 3 screws around the tripod, and we are done. Our mount is well installed and it is super sturdy. But this isn't the main party trick of the mount, because now that we have the mount in place, we can look at the polar alignment mechanism, and in particular, the adjustment in altitude. Like, let's have a quick look at how it works. I can unlock the knobs for the altitude, and you're like, wait, didn't you say you didn't need locks? Bear with me for a moment. And once I unlock it, I can move the mount freely. And that's so nice. It is so freaking nice because I can switch from equatorial mode to like Alt-Az mode very easily. So Alt-Az mode would be here, right? Extremely easily. And of course, we have a gradation there, so you can see the rough angle that you're at. And once you're done with the rough angle adjustment, so for me it would be around 36 or 35 degrees for Tokyo, you can just lock things in place. So when I tighten the knob here, you'll see the teeth that are here will mesh on both sides, mesh together until they're absolutely meshed like that. And this holds the mount in place. And then if you wish to adjust the angle some more, which you will for the polar alignment, you can see the main altitude adjustment knob is this one. And it's connected to a very fine screw there that can just move the mount extremely slowly. Like one turn of this knob is much less angle change than with most other mounts. And so you can do very precise adjustments very easily. It's honestly a pleasure to use. And the azimuth system is very similar. You have very fine screws that push against pins on both sides. And there's no need to lock anything after you've done the adjustments via those screws, which are super smooth, by the way. A real pleasure to do polar alignment. So this is effectively what you see is what you get polar alignment, which honestly the Warp Astron WD-20 came very close to that, but this is the real deal. So before we go in any further, what are the specifications of this mount? Basically, you have the same specification as the ZW-AM5. It is Type 17 strain wave gear drives in both axes. The RA axis has a brake for when you lose power, and it's powered on both sides by, I believe, NEMA 42 stepper motors. The price of the mount is slightly higher than the ZW-AM5 at, I believe, $2,130 US, and the tripod itself is an option that costs $400 US. So it isn't cheap, even though it looks, feels, and like everything about it feels very premium. It's as if like a Chinese company woke up one morning and decided that there was no premium astrophotography strain wave gear mounts, and let's make one that looks, feels premium and has innovative features, basically, which is really cool. There's some other cool tricks that this mount has. For instance, you can mount an electronic polar scope at the front, so there's a mount for that. But also the power system is very interesting, and hard to connect this to power, hard to connect this to your control PC, for instance, a PC with Nina, is very interesting. You are able to power the mount via this DC in port here, in which case there is another port on the side of the dovetail, which is, I believe, here, that becomes a DC 12 volt output. So input here, output on the dovetail. For me, my power management is actually from my StellarMate Pro, which sits on top of the telescope. So I used this port on the dovetail to be my power input, because then you had the power input side and the plug for here that were static relative to one another. And the same thing for the USB. So you have a USB-A full-size USB here and another one there, and you can use either to control the mount, which is pretty nice. There is a third port which is both in the dovetail and at the base of the mount, and this is for the hand controller. And the hand controller plug and cable also feels super premium, and plugging it in is very satisfying, but it's a proprietary type of plug. So I kind of feel that's a bummer compared to like the WD-20 from Warp Astron, where it's just a USB-C cable, so you can replace that easily. But something that I noticed that was very interesting is that this controller interface, hand controller interface, was exactly the same as the Warp Astron WD-20 interface. Exactly the same. So you have the same weird terminologies in the controller, the same menus, the same everything, and the same control scheme with the buttons there, same layout. And I finally understood why. This mount and the Warp Astron mount as well, also the UMI 17 Lite mount, they're all using a control system called OnStep, which is open source, has been used all over the world. It's an amazing system, but that means it's always common. And the controller uses an open source fork of OnStep that is called Emcan Astro, and it seems to have been made by some French developers. And they use the term guide rate instead of slew rate, and they use the term pulse guide rate instead of guide rate. And you can change either with the controller, but it's a bit of a convoluted process. I've already gone into those details in my Warp Astron WD-20 review. So if you're interested, you can I have the link up above and or down in the description. But basically, the controller is not the most intuitive thing ever built. And there's also some weird idiosyncrasies with OnStep, in particular with the Meridian flip. Although for me, the default settings on this mount for the Meridian flip were perfect. Basically, you want to make sure that the Meridian limit east is 0, west is something like 8 degrees, whichever, or 5 degrees, or 2 degrees even, as long as your mount doesn't hit the tripod. And the control driver from something like the ASI Air, which works with this mount perfectly fine, by the way, is the OnStep driver, which is the same as Warp Astron. So I used the driver for the Warp Astron mount unchanged with this mount. And this mount, just like the Warp Astron mount, they emit their own Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi SSID is OnStep. If you connect to it, you can control the mount via a free application called OnStep. So it's all available there as part of the package. But at the same time, there are those weird idiosyncrasies that you see in so many open source projects that I've already detailed in the WD-20 video. So overall, I think the hardware feels very premium and innovative to me. And the software side, like head control software and the driver, they're not premium. They're the open source vanilla thing, exactly as is, which is not a bad thing per se, but is something to be aware of. And that could be something that if you were to buy this mount, you could struggle with when you start. Be aware of that. And as usual, if you buy a new mount, whether it's this or anything else, test it out during the day first. I have a whole video on the topic if you search the channel. And I'd like to note an interesting thing as well is the mount by default is set up for a Vixen dovetail. But if you want to change to Losmandy dovetail, like typically that's when you have a heavier scope, you can just remove those 4 screws on each side, and those black bars, they come off, and then you have a Losmandy style dovetail saddle, which I really like because even for the Losmandy equipment, the distance to the RA axis stays as low as possible, which is really good. Also, this mount, without any counterweight, claims to carry 15 kilograms, and we're really going to test that out at 20 centimeters from the axis of rotation, or with a counterweight up to 20 kilograms. Next, let's have a look at what I am going to put on this poor mount, because yes, I am going to be torturing it with a scope setup that is basically going to go, I think, over the specifications of the mount. So I'm not being nice to it, and you'll see the raw results of that. So let's go to that setup. Before we do so, let me know what you think of this from this, especially the polar alignment routine, down in the comments. I'll be very interesting to look at that. And while you're going there, please like the video. It takes 1 second, makes a huge difference. And if you're new to the channel, you may consider subscribing, in which case, welcome. And if you want to help the channel even more and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, or even Amazon, if you do so after clicking my links in the description, it helps me out at no cost to you. If you want to help more directly, you can join the channel as a member using the join button next to the subscribe button, or join my Patreon as a subscriber, and link is down in the description. My channel members and Patreon supporters, you know it, you make the channel possible. As always, thank you so much. Anyway, let's go to the actual setup. So this is going to be the setup where we test this little mount from Emcan Astro. And as you saw, we set up the tripod, and this is the tripod that we're going to use as is, even though it's not as robust looking as the other tripod that I have that I bought from a Japanese manufacturer, and I have a video on the topic somewhere. I'll put the link up above and down in the description. But you know, I wanted to test with their optional tripod, so we have the whole set. The mount is there very happily, and it is configured to basically take the Losmandy style dove plate of my dual scope Frankenscope there. So we have 2 Newtonians on top with a lot of heavy equipment really, and when I measured it, the whole setup weight on top of this mount is 14 kilograms, and the mount specifications call for up to 15 kilograms at 20 centimeters, and I think from the axis we are much further than 20 centimeters. So I realized that effectively we are using this mount over capacity without a counterweight, and I'm wondering whether this is the right thing to do. I might, if I encounter issues, I will likely go down to a single telescope, but be aware that this test is using the mount in the worst possible scenario, because we are effectively over capacity. Yet, I will say that I've already done one live stream of astrography where I used this mount for the very first time in front of a live audience. I'll put the link up above, but also down in the description if you're interested. It's a 3 hours long live stream, so you might not be interested. But it was very impressive in that it slewed without any issue. It slews actually extremely silently. It's not quite as silent as my Warp Astron WD-20. If I put my ear close to it, I can hear a motor, but it is still extremely quiet. And while we were imaging during that live stream, we noticed that the guiding was basically keeping roughly at 0.7 arc seconds, even though while I had been pressed for time, I had basically done the guiding calibration at a place where PhD2 wouldn't recommend doing the calibration. And when I tried 30-second exposures, like I tried a couple, even maybe 3 in a row during that live stream, without any guiding, as I recall, the stars were really good shapes before I even started guiding, which is not supposed to happen with a strain wave gear mount. When I did try during that live stream a 60-second unguided exposure, definitely we were starting to see weird star shapes and star trailing. So I was a bit relieved by that. And also, by the way, I am taking advantage of the feature to have like the input for USB and power at the dovetail level, because the power and the USB come from the StellarMate Pro for the power, and the USB comes from the little computer on top. So relative to the dovetail, they are stationary. So it's perfect that I have those inputs directly on the dovetail. And I will also say, during the live stream, I did the polar alignment with the mounts, and it was a polar alignment coming from nothing. We were 8 degrees off when I started with the polar alignment, but I had a good chance to play with the polar alignment system that does not require me to lock anything once I'm done with the polar alignment. So there is no way to bump the mount out of polar alignment when you lock something in the end, because there's no locks, it's already locked. And what I've seen up to now, and I'll test again tonight because I've slightly messed with this, so I think we're out of polar alignment, but both the altitude and the azimuth adjustments were a pleasure, like super smooth, and I didn't feel like I need to put like too much strength in any of the adjustments. The knobs are also really well done, and this is with such a heavy payload on top. So I was actually really impressed, and I would say up to now this is the best experience I've had polar aligning a mount, and that includes the WD-20 from Warp Astron, which I had praised in that regard already. I will say, however, if I basically put pressure on the scope, you might not be able to see on the camera, there is a wobble that seems to come from the altitude adjustment, because there's a very fine screw to do this altitude adjustment. Because it's very fine, it's very easy to do very small corrections, and I had to turn far more than I'm used to do like 30 arc minutes corrections, which is a good thing once you get used to it, but there is still backlash, right? And because there is no lock, when I do this, I see this tiny wobbliness there. How much is that going to impact things, especially with wind? I don't know, but we're really testing this thing at the limits of its capabilities, and probably we are pushing it beyond its specifications, so I'm sure we'll have an answer. Oh, and a quick mention for the tripod legs as well. The adjusters on the tripod legs, they work really well, even with that much weight on top of the tripod, so that's also a good design. It really feels like Emcan Astro has thought of a lot of things about this mount. And I believe this is the second version of their mount, and they've been on the Chinese market for around 2 years. So they have had quite a bit of feedback from the Chinese market, but they are late to the party when it comes to the international / outside of China market. There is one little thing that I will mention though, is the dovetail there. It's very pleasant to use. It's also extremely smooth, just like the rest of the mount. But when I actually removed this scope once to basically weigh the whole thing to find out that it was roughly 14 kilograms, when I unscrewed those knobs there, the dovetail itself, this part of the dovetail here, did not move. It didn't want to go away. I had to use a little lever to get it to move off, and I feel this is probably because the springs inside might not be quite strong enough. So despite the attention to detail, maybe this is something that Emcan Astro can look into improving. It was a bit worrisome at first because like, how am I going to get that scope off of the dovetail without like having to do a surgery on the mount? So it didn't come to that at all, but it's something to keep in mind. Now that we've done with the setup, we actually managed to do an imaging night on M51, and let's have a look at the results, in particular the guiding results on M51. Okay, and let's very quickly look at the guide results that I have with the EM31Pro from Emcan Astro, overloaded with that crazy Frankenscope. And yet, despite that, looking at the guiding, you can see the guide results are 0.65 arc seconds. Now this is on M51 at a declination of 47 degrees. So it is not the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario would be very close to the celestial meridian. Maybe near the meridian, we would go towards 0.9 arc seconds. And it was very constant throughout the night. Like if I go to the next session around midnight of 1 hour, we're now at 0.7 arc seconds. And if I go later on at 1 a.m., we're at 0.59 arc seconds. All of those, I mean, I would have like, jumped with joy just a few years ago with my EQ6R Pro if I had gotten such guiding figures. And going to the largest sample of 1 hour and 40 minutes, let's do a quick analysis of the right ascension. So first with the drift corrected, here is how it looks like. So we have some excursions beyond 1.5, sometimes even here 2 arc seconds, but those are quite rare. And the overwhelming majority stays between +1 and -1, which is exactly what we want to see, and something that I am impressed by with such a payload. Like I was basically putting the mount over capacity. So that's really a torture test. And the frequency analysis is very interesting. We have a peak at 216 seconds. This is a peak that I see with pretty much every harmonic drive mount that I've tested. 220 seconds or so. I have no idea what period this corresponds to, but let me know in the comments if you know. I'd be very interested to know. We see another peak here at around 18 seconds. Again, no idea what that relates to. And there's another peak here around 6 seconds. So all of those add up together to make up for that error that we see, and the error in RA is around 0.48 arc seconds, right? So, but it does tell me that maybe I could set a predictive PEC in PhD2 and set it up to be like at a period of 217, 220 seconds, and see if that helps with the guiding, although with these numbers, the guiding hardly needs help. And if we look at the raw RA that is not drift adjusted, we can see that we're basically between minus, what is that, maybe 12, 13, minus 13 and plus 10 arc seconds, which is really well, and it looks overall very well behaved with no abrupt spikes that would be difficult to guide out. So this is, especially for an overloaded mount, pretty good. The question becomes, should you buy this mount? And this is something that I cannot really answer. I'm impressed by the polar alignment method. What you see is what you get, polar alignment. It's excellent. I'm impressed by the tripod and the leveling adjustment that's built into the tripod spreader, and the fact that this tripod with the mount and the 14 kilograms scope on top was still able to resist perfectly well during the whole night. So that was good tripod. Good polar alignment on the mount. I like the dovetail design, despite that little like spring issue where it was difficult to remove my dual scope Frankenscope from the mount. And you know, I also liked the placement of the plugs, both on the declination axis and the main like base of the mount. I wish some of the plugs had been like at the static base of the mount, so that there's absolutely no movement whatsoever between that and, let's say, a battery that you're using to power your scope and mount. But I guess that's, you know, wishful thinking. We're pretty close to a really well engineered mount, and the finish, the weight is really 4 kilograms. It feels light. It feels very well built. I think the biggest sticking point there is the support. Can you expect good support from a company like that is based in China versus buying from a local retailer like Emcan Astro? And I know some people flipped the dice, or no, not the dice, flipped the coin with the Warp Astron WD-20, a mount that I'm very satisfied with. I said a lot. And I think Warp Astron has been successful enough that they're finally managing to list their mount on Emcan Astro in the United States, so you can have local support. That's not yet the case with Emcan. And if I go to their purchase page here on their website, and it tells me that the shop is Star Trip, so we can go to startripastro.com. That's where you have like basically the publicity of Star Trip as a company, but the actual shop is on AliExpress. So again, I'll have the links down in the description, and you can see we have, and sorry, the currencies are in Japanese yen. Let me change that to English and USD. Here we are, and you have the mount head, you have the tripod, you have additional extension rods. You also have like a kit to make this mount usable for bino viewers, all sorts of cool stuff, and you could buy from this and it would get delivered to you. But what to do when you have an issue with the mount, or it's dead on arrival or something like that, that is always something to keep in mind. And I cannot provide any advice on that. I can also only provide my opinion on the mount that I was sent. And overall, that opinion is very positive. The only kind of drawback is the software, which is pure vanilla on step, which has some idiosyncrasies, as I covered in the Warp Astron review. Nothing that you can't overcome, but that could be a bit frustrating at first. But let's say that we are sure that there are no support issues. And I think overall, for a brand that is trying to sell abroad, they'd probably bend over backwards to make sure that if you have an issue, it gets fixed quickly, because early reputation is extremely important. But so let's assume that you won't have any support issues. It's a very solid offering. It's $130 more than the ZW-AM5. It has similar specifications, but in my mind, it's very clear that it is, in terms of build quality and innovation, it is miles ahead, not quite in the same league as the AM5. It feels like it's in a different league for that additional amount on top. But then if you are comparing to something like the Warp Astron WD-17S or the Emcan Astro WD-17R, there's so many of those Strainwave gear mounts out there, which is great for us because competition means lower prices. But then if you compare to those, which would be better to get? I don't know. So now we are stuck in analysis paralysis. What are your thoughts about this? Let us know down in the comments. While you're going there, don't forget to like the video. It takes 1 second. It makes the whole difference. Of course, you have channel memberships, Patreons. You can also use my links in the description to help me without any cost to you. But more important than all of that, I hope you liked this video. I hope it was interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.